Okay, folks, we are officially back here with Dr. Ian Brodie for our formal interview. It's not that formal. It's pretty casual. What does Dom usually say? Dom, what do you usually say when you do this? It's weird being the leader for the interview now. I know one thing we have to say, which is thank you, sleuths. Thank you, interview sleuths. There are a bunch of people on our team that make the interviews happen. It's not just me and Dom sitting here looking cool on camera or running tech. There's a whole host of people who curate questions and do research on all of our guests, and they make wonderful, wonderful questions every single week for the people we have on the show. So if you like a question that you hear, don't thank me, thank the sleuths. Are we ready to get into it? Dom, I don't know if you were saying anything, but we couldn't hear you for a second.
No, I was just nodding. You're doing a great job.
You're just nodding. Okay, cool. Okay.
I normally call the sleuths intrepid and stunning.
Well, they are that for sure. They are intrepid and
Okay.
stunning. So,
Good.
but we can all agree there. Ian, so first question. We haven't really had a guest on our show before that specifically covers humor. What's the relationship between folklore and humor, and how does this tie into your work with stand-up? How do we get from, like, folklore to humor to stand-up?
Well, okay. I think one of the sort of the basic questions is that folklorists have been studying humorous things for a while. And so, I mean, whether we want to consider forms of the riddle humorous or jokes, or, I mean, we usually presume that jokes qualify as a kind of humor. And the question is, do we simply, once you move past that basic question of what do these people find funny, you move to the question of why do they find it funny? So you start to, whether you want to or not, dip your toe into humor theory. And I'm not a huge fan of humor theory in general, because for the most part, humor theory, I find, tends to try and figure out why something is funny almost decontextually. As if, I mean, there is some kind of pushback on some aspects of contemporary folklore. When folklorists will say, well, you need to understand the context, and you sort of have all these rationalists who say, no, it should fundamentally work, as if humor is an equation, or as if meaning is fundamentally some kind of an equation. So, when people try and look at a joke and try and parse it and analyze it and bring it down to its sort of component parts, they make reference to the idea that these are things that resonate within the culture, within the particular context, but they try and turn it into some kind of absolute equation, as it were. And there's sort of, humor studies is rife in part because there's, I actually asked Elliot O-Ring this, I said, why is everyone obsessed with computer analysis of jokes? And he said, because if you can monetize how to make a joke, that's like the next step in AI. Basically, that's the next Turing test, if you can actually have a computer understand and make something funny. So how do you teach humor that way to a computer? It's like, oh, okay. But to a certain extent, that's kind of outside of the folklorist's ken in many aspects. How that relates to my stand-up, to my study of stand-up, is I am less interested in trying to figure out why jokes work, and more interested in trying to figure out why jokes that seem to be, or why a form of humor that seems to be largely contextual and largely collaborative and largely a matter of speaking within your in-group, can then be transferred into much broader contexts, larger mediated contexts, popular culture, distance, the mechanics of commercial capitalist art, as it were. So I really don't, I mean, I study humor in as much as I am studying something that is humorous, but more than anything, I'm not seeking that question of why a thing is funny. I'm trying to sort of figure out those techniques of taking interpersonal, face-to-face, artistic communication in small groups, but with punchlines, and broadening that out into larger and larger spheres. So,
Wow. Okay.
does that make sense?
Not only did that make total sense, but you're getting a lot of agreement and hype and like, whoa, I never thought of it that way before in the chat, which is always really good. So people are learning something from your answer, which is awesome.
Yay!
Yay! That's so cool. No, I never really thought of it that way before. Like, I
What's
guess
the it in that statement? You never thought of...
the it is the like structuralist versus like functionalist way of like
Okay,
how that
yeah.
actually gets enacted in performance.
Yeah.
I guess. And what I mean by that is like how what you were just describing of like the little pieces of what makes the thing funny, and whether that's like the order of operations in the joke or the context or whatever, versus how humor is like used in groups, or like why people laugh even. There's a difference between even like telling a joke and then like why people laugh. Right?
Yeah, because there's, on one hand, there's this sort of broad question about what is the psychological function of humor, and then what is the sociological function of humor. I mean, so you sort of get your Freudians, you get your various other theorists, and the idea of like release, and then you're very much in sort of this functionalist mode. And then you have the people who are trying to deep down sort of linguistically try and analyze it and come up with something, approaching humor theory. But it's, again, they crave science and they crave the replicability of results. And I don't think that jokes work within the mindset of a replicability of results. It can't necessarily be condensed down to a formula. You can determine structure. That's cool. But you can determine structure in the same way you can determine structure in the Märchen. Right. And yet, at the same time, it doesn't tell you anything about why a narrative is delightful. I mean, it just doesn't bring those kind of aesthetic questions to it. It's just a what question, but it hints at a how, but it doesn't really sort of suggest a why and to what end, beyond very basic, very ordinary functionalist answers.
I have two things. One is for those if you don't know what Märchen is, it's like the German word for fairy tales or folk tales. And two, this to me is like the perfect way to talk about like oral history and data collection, or for example, like against other sorts of frameworks of knowledge. And what folklore does is like bring together the non-replicable stuff, I guess. And like what you're describing of like you miss something if you make it too much of this piece fits into this piece, that's into this piece, because every single performance is like a new way of telling the joke because of the context. Is that what I'm hearing? Kind of? Or am I missing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think.
Okay.
Yes.
We have a follow-up question for you on this.
Okay.
It's a little bit more specific. Dom, do you want to ask, or do you want me to keep going? Do you just want me to keep going?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, we want to know both. We want to know what a vulgar art is, both the phrase and your book. We'd like to tell like why is your book called A Vulgar Art? What does that mean? And tell us about what you studied or what is encapsulated in that book.
Well, there's two entry points into the title Vulgar Art. For one thing, it's directly a quote from George Carlin towards the end of his life. There's interviews that I think I traced his first use of it into the early 2000s or maybe the late 1990s. But one of his very final interviews, he talked about how stand-up comedy is an art, but it's a vulgar art. It's for the people. And all those senses of the word vulgarity. I mean, obviously the linguistics, and that it's not... It's the language use of vulgar, and that it often deals with topics that are outside of the area of proper discussion. It's earthy, as it were. But I also think in terms vulgar, and I go back to all my old biblical studies stuff, in terms of vulgar means of the crowd. It means of the people, basically. Vulgare. The reason that the first translation of the scriptures, the Greek scriptures, was called the Vulgate by Jerome, was that, oh yeah, Catholic student nodding vigorously. It's that it was translating it from a language that was of the educated classes to a language of the people. So, I mean, so that's it. So you could use the word vulgar very much in the same way that you use the word vernacular, and very much in the same way that you use the word folk, if you wanted to. The three are with different nuances, and of course they're laden terms, so they have different histories. But, you know, almost at their core, they are interchangeable. You know, vernaculus comes from a slave that was born into a master's house, vulgar of the crowd, folk of the people, and so on. But they all imply some kind of remove from a center of power or a center of privilege more than anything else. So that's why the vulgar art title works. And what the book is very similar exactly to what I just said, in that you have my sort of touchstones are people like Bauman's article on the LaHave Islands and the discussion at the post office in LaHave, or the general store in LaHave, or really the book that sort of changed my perspective entirely was Michael J. Bell's work on The View from Brown's Lounge and Black Middle Class Play. You know, that ethnography of that bar in African American neighborhood, middle class African American neighborhood of Philadelphia in the mid 1970s, and the idea that there are forms of talk that take place in these third spaces, and they are convivial and they are vulgar in that sense of the word, although, you know, in all senses of the word, really. And they are fun, and momentarily someone gets up and attention is paid towards them through kinesic and proxemic cues. I'm now listening to Dom, and Dom is telling a story, and like he momentarily goes. But it's not a monologue. He's not telling it by himself. It is this ongoing conversation where most of the focus has been granted to Dom, and we're like, yeah, okay, no, and that kind of thing. So, you know, very much the way that we understand legend being told is it's a dialogic form. It's not a monologic form. And, you know, eventually the story ends and Dom sort of reverts back into the mass, and there's the distinction between, in classic Robert George's style, that distinction between performer and audience disappears until someone else comes on, and this, you know, this, social pairing exists and sort of, you know, gloms out that way. Stand-up is that kind of talk. It is sociable. It is informal. It is not a monologue. It is dialogic, and it is created with the audience. But the difference is that you're not doing it among a group of intimates. You're not doing it amongst a group of people that you have a huge, thick cluster of common references, you know, so of the same socioeconomic background, of the same occupation, of the same age, or whatever, the kind of people that you know, the kind of people that you talk shit with. And Michael J. Bell uses talk shit. Barbara Clown uses shit speak. It's not dissimilar from when Chandra Mukherjee talks about bullshitting among hitchhikers. And so, you know, it's a fun word to use, especially with that vulgarity that's implied with it. But you're not among these people. When you do stand up, now it is a profession, and you've gone outside of that core reference group, and you are talking to people who are, first of all, larger. You know, you might be a crowd. Second of all, it is more formalized, and that it's not Dom stands up from the table or Dom just gestures and we all sort of turn around and he becomes the guy. It's a stage. It's a microphone. It's a thing where, okay, he's not assuming the role of performer in this Georgian sense. He is a capital P performer. There's probably some kind of money exchange. He better deliver, because I paid cover and I have a 2-drink minimum when this happens. And he might not even be from this town. The professional comedian, in order to cultivate a reputation, in order to pay themselves, they go from larger to larger market. And so my other touchstone is Neil Rosenberg's work on country music makers and their markets. And this, if you've never come across that article, it's this wonderful dissection about what distinguishes professional from amateur. And it is not innate ability. It is the ability to cultivate a market. So, I mean, there are amateur musicians who can outshine professional musicians, but professional musicians understand what audiences want, not simply the people in front of them, but in larger and larger and larger markets. And so they can deliver. So a comedian is doing that in a larger and larger and larger market. But what she is doing is trying to affect the same kind of casual, nonchalant, intimate kind of talk that happens around the table. They want to reproduce Dom, but in an arena halfway around the world. So now, how do you do that? Well, you have an understanding of audience. You have an understanding of topics that aren't necessarily going to be incredibly specific, but might be broader. You try and engage the local audience, but you also understand that this might be recorded, this might be simulcast somewhere else, and so you have an audience, a much larger audience, and perhaps if it's recorded, a permanent audience who isn't present to hear. So now you're dealing with these two audiences. And what is more, you cultivate a reputation. So you're not some asshole who just shows up on the stage of an arena. You are a person that people know to come to see because you have a reputation for performance. You have a reputation for competency. It's like, I'm not going to see a comedian. I'm going to see this particular comedian. And I'm talking now at that sort of grand, large scale of, basically almost on the level of celebrity comedian. But in between schlub in a bar and Kevin Hart in a stadium in Philadelphia, you have a whole different range of a cultivated reputation for competency met with an understanding of an audience that can actually deliver on that reputation for competency, that while on stage can deliver a talk that is remarkably similar to the same, hey, how's it going? Do you want to hear? You would not believe what happened to me the other day. Stand up and start talking shit to a group of strangers halfway around the world, and potentially 20 years hence because you've got it on recording. That's kind of what the book is, but with jokes.
I think you blew my mind and you blew the chat's mind. Holy crap. There are a bunch of people, when you're talking about like thinking of vulgarity and shit, we have Benton's Dream, who was on our show before, we talked about shit posting, which might even be like another evolved form of that, which you didn't mention specifically, but like, I don't know. Wow. Everybody's like totally identifying with what you're saying. And hey, if you haven't already, go buy a Vulgar Art, the book. People, Dom posted in the chat for people to check out and see. That was like more than the summary we needed, but it was definitely the monologue we wanted. Cool. So thank you so much. That was awesome. Wow. I have a bunch to think about. I guess like returning to our questions now too. This is like another, I mean, this is great. Another kind of similarly phrased question. How did you get from a pathway of religious studies to folklore to stand up? And then I have, this is written in the chat here, we have to get from Aquinas 2.0 to stand up somehow. How did this happen? And where the lovingly called Aquinas 2.0 would be the person that your thesis was on. Oh my gosh.
Bernard
Lonergan. Lonergan? Was that what it was?
Bernard Lonergan. Okay.
Yes. We need to know how that happened.
Okay. I'll try and do this as quickly as I can without boring a bunch of people.
Okay.
Bernard Lonergan was he happened to be Canadian, but I didn't choose him because he was Canadian. But he was a Canadian Jesuit theologian. He was born in Buckingham, Quebec in 1904, and he died in Toronto in 1984. He, among other things, taught at the Gregorianum, which is one of the big universities, one of the big Catholic Jesuit universities in Rome, where he was the person who taught the course on the Trinity for about 15 years. And there's some wonderful Lonergan lore about how the fact that when he submitted his book to the publishers for the on the Trinity, one of the things that happens in Catholic publishing when you're talking about this kind of stuff is that it needs to be vetted by the church fundamentally. So they give it to the church, the Vatican, and the Vatican says, I don't know, send it to the guy who teaches Trinity at the Gregorianum. And so he gets his own manuscript. He's like, yep, and check marks and sends it back. And then so, marks his own words.
Oh my
So, hey,
gosh.
peer review works, kids. Just jig the system as best you can. So
Oh my gosh.
anyway, his two major works were Insight, A Study in Human Understanding. The thing about Lonergan was that he was interested in trying to revolutionize, well, not revolutionize, he was trying to bring theology into the 20th century. He was trying to say the problem with theology is that it is based in Aquinas, who was a genius, and Aristotle, who was a genius, but they were both stuck in a classical mindset where the idea is that the universe is fixed and understanding is permanent. Where he was interested in 19th and 20th century sciences, where science is actually emergent. It's always this self-refining. You don't actually have this understanding. So he needed to figure out some kind of method in how to do theology. In order to do a method in theology, you need to figure out what it is to understand something. So his first work, Insight, was, as I said, the subtitle, A Study in Human Understanding. It's metaphysics, it's noetic phenomenology, and it comes to try and figure something out. One of the things he talks about is the differentiation of knowledge. And so, what does it mean to have like a scientific understanding, an artistic understanding, a religious understanding, and so on. And one of the things he points out, he's got the book's like way thick, and 2 of his 20 chapters are on common sense. And the idea is that common sense is the realm that we all live in. It is local, it is specific, it defies the people who exist in the world of common sense do not explain, because to explain is to sort of, why do I need to explain things? On the other hand, common sense is common to a particular place, and you recognize it with that it is only common to another place. And when you go somewhere else, the common sense is different there. So my first idea was that when I encountered the field of folklore, and that's a historical thing, and I'll get back to that in a second, was that basically he was trying to sort of come up with some understanding of common sense that we all exist in. Now, some of us also exist in the common sense of our time and place, but also we have scientific understanding. We are happy in the world of theoretical language where we have less slippery terms for things. I mean, the whole thing about theory is that is a fixed set of terms and relations. It doesn't mean that it is permanent, but it means that when we are using these words, we all know what these words mean because we have a history of them. And it's not like whatever the hell dinner is at any given moment, which has like 50 different meanings, if you think about it, depending on what side of whatever parallel you happen to be on. So I was interested in Lonergan in that way, and got involved in folklore sort of behind the scenes. His other work was Method in Theology, where he basically took his understanding of how we come to an understanding and applied it to how theology as a discipline is sort of broken up into different functional specializations. Functional specialties is what he calls them. So there I am. I'm at Memorial. I've just done my religious studies master's, and I am still at Memorial for historical, personal reasons. And I see people who are interested I see the folklore department there. I know people are doing folklore there, and I'm beginning to sort of vicariously expose myself to folklore. And I have that, this is kind of the science of common sense. This actually supplements and complements what Lonergan was talking about, but it expands it in a different way. And I could I could see marrying the two. It's not a matter of like what you guys need is Lonergan, but in terms of like this would be a really interesting sort of development of the thought that I'd had at that point. Oh, with my waving, I just hit my 10,000 steps, and it's good because it's 20 minutes to midnight where I'm here. So I went I said, I'm at Memorial. I can go into the PhD program. And they said, sure. And so there I am. And my first thing was to sort of do a Lonerganian approach, whether it's sort of functional specializations or the common sense approach. And I had, prior to my MA, I actually tried to do an MA in theology. My completed master's was in religious studies, but one of my dark secret shames is that I started a graduate degree and just sort of crapped out of it. And it was in theology at one of the centers of Lonergan studies. And I was interested in a Lonerganian approach to humor. So really, doing Lonergan theory, but relating it within noetic phenomenology. And so I decided, so when I'm going to bring Lonergan to folklore and rescue the day and everyone's going to be happy, when that didn't really sort of gel as a project, that's when I started getting exposed to things like African-American toasts, and all of a sudden my fandom from stand-up was like, oh, I can see this connection. So it's not that I put Lonergan on the back burner, it's just like, this is an interesting phenomenon that I'd like to explore a little bit, and it's a much more tangible thesis topic, the relationship between this thing and folklore study. So it worked that way. But Lonergan works really well with an understanding of belief. I mean, and Hufford, I think, and Lonergan would go quite well hand in hand. And my favorite story is that it was at an AFS before I was ever there, because a friend of mine was at AFS and knew me very well. And Erica Brady and Diane Goldstein were on the stage at the same time, and they're doing one of their panels in terms of folk belief and religion. And Erica Brady started talking, and she said, well, the person I turn to is Bernard Lonergan. And Diane Goldstein was like, what? Because Diane,
oh my gosh.
I had passed, tried like, hey, what Lonergan stuff? She's like, no, Boris gives a fuck about this. And then she sort of, huh? And then gave that Diane Goldstein kind of stare right at my friend, and who was like, yeah, well, what do you know? So Erica Brady and I are basically the only Lonerganian folklorists, or the only folkloric Lonerganians, depending on where you stand. So that's it. And I dip back into the Lonergan stuff every now and then. It's embedded in the thought, if it's not necessarily me taking a chapter and a half to talk about it.
That's so fascinating. It makes me think a lot about theorizing knowledge or theorizing common sense. Like, that's what I've been doing in my grad program. So thank you for saying that. Yeah. And you're taking me into a very good week to be thinking about how we understand comparison, or thinking about how we come to understand what it means for something to be common sense, and how, just like you were saying, common sense it's not that it's uncommon, it's that it's very common and very different for everybody depending on their context.
But it also works really well for study of the supernatural, because, I mean, one of the things he talks about is that, we gather data through the senses, and then we try and make sense of that data, the insight into phantasm. We're basically doing some kind of diagram, and the first thing that we do is we come up with a hypothesis that seems to work. Oh, this thing resembles this thing. And then, the data kind of flies away, and we have this hypothesis. And then, of course, you reflect on it, and you see, is my understanding actually correct? But the Hufford stuff, I mean, Hufford's idea of this is, the experience-centered approach, where it's like, these people have an actual bodied experience. Their interpretation of what happened and their understanding of what happened might be incorrect, but you begin with that understanding of data that they hadn't experienced. It's very commensurate with Lonergan stuff. Not to mention the fact that Lonergan is also, he's a fucking theologian. So he's really interested in the experience of those things that cannot be understood save through faith. That this is an understanding that does not come entirely from a process of discernment, a process of understanding, a process of the same mode that scientific understanding comes from. It comes from a profound knowing that actually precedes understanding. Gesture.
Dang. You're predicting. I said dang.
You said dang, and then your mic went out for a second.
Oh no! Uh-oh. You got it here. Can you hear me? It's good.
I can hear you now.
No,
Okay.
Daisy, I think you just said dang too loud.
I just was too
did-
powerful.
Yeah, you
Okay.
did too powerful.
I'll turn it
Too
down.
powerful,
I'll
dang.
No.
That's the name
Keep
of your memoir.
scoot back
keep
a
your
little.
mic at the same level. Just don't dang so loud.
I just don't dang so loud. Okay.
I like you adjust the microphone as opposed to stop screaming.
Oh my god, yes, exactly. You're segueing right into our next kind of like follow-up question, which is how do you get from thinking about religious studies and theology to folklore to comedy to now contemporary legend and COVID-19 and in relation to the journal Contemporary Legend and things of your more recent work?
Okay, yeah. Well, contemporary legend, I sort of fell. Well, no, I was going to say contemporary legend I fell into, but one of the things that I like the process of legend, and I don't really care much about the content of legend. My best friends in the world are Andrea Kita and Lynn McNeil, and they love this supernatural stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. It's very cool. It's like no, but I do love the nerdy Bill Ellisian shit at the back end of legend scholarship. The idea of that, it's this understanding that is at the periphery of what is formally accepted, the periphery of what polite people talk about in public, more or less, which is, again, not actually that dissimilar from the processes of stand-up. And you know, when I was saying earlier that legend is dialogue, the legend is like, did you hear about this? What's going on here? And, you know, in its pure form, legend is, it's not story. It's not narrative. It's this urgent communication where, like, I have something that you ought to know. It is directed towards you. And one of the reasons that I'm telling you is that I can't figure it out myself. And so it is this opportunity to try and digest what is happening, which is not that dissimilar. It's a different mode in many ways, but it's not that dissimilar from what's happening in stand-up, where it's like, here's this thing with the implicit, isn't this crazy? Isn't this funny? Isn't this weird? Isn't this absurd? And so they're both on these, they're both vulgar in terms of, commonsensical. They're both outside of sort of what happens in brightly lit forums that are incredibly monologic in a voice from on high, like myth, like Märchen. They are, and so like one of the first things that I ended up writing about stand-up was that early article about, I call it stand-up as a genre of intimacy, where basically it's like, you take legend research and you just plop it and look at what's happening there. Look at Ellis's dialogue and the sort of, trying to figure out its collaborative nature. And you begin this process of becoming to understand stand-up without bothering with the why something is funny. It is, I am building a community on the periphery of communities when I am talking to you in this way. So my legend stuff, I mean, I now have this sort of like fairly decent understanding of the content of legend because I've been editor of the journal for so very long, and I teach it, and people are always asking me, and so on and so on. But I really just kind of like this nerdy process, and it forces me to really double down on the idea of how much of folklore is these communications between people, that they are these tiny little efforts at simultaneously communicating something that is collaborative, that is meaningful, while that self-mediating process, or the mutually mediating process of building new form, building new groups, as it were. And so so even now, when I'm asked to talk about conspiracy theory or so on, you can motif spot all you want. But what really intrigues me about conspiracy theory is what impels someone to tell one, what impels someone to participate in those communities, and this is where I sort of put on my most kumbaya moment in terms of my folklore stuff, is that they are telling you this thing because they care about you and they're worried about you and they want you to know this. The fact that what they are telling you is bonkers bullshit is almost irrelevant. Most importantly is that they need to communicate this. They need to communicate this to you so urgently that they often don't screen it for understanding. But it's like, oh my God. And now we go back to the cliches of like your Uncle Bill at the table or so on. But fundamentally, they are shaken at their core that this thing is happening. Or really, they're shaken at their core that a genuine thing is happening. But they find a culprit that can help to explain this or distract themselves from it. And they are spreading it. They are telling it. They are committed to it. A, because it provides an answer. And B, because fundamentally they want to help you. At their core, they are still trying to build community. They might be trying to build their immediate community by vilifying vast swaths of the world. That's a problem. That is a fucking problem, and folklorists can't just say, oh, community, and leave it at that.
Yeah.
But you begin with that as their motivation. At the very least, you have an inroads instead of just saying, well, you know what you're talking about is bullshit, because that's tiring and it's belittling and it doesn't actually point to the rationale of why they're telling it. How's that for an answer? Taking a sip.
I'm gonna need to like re-listen to all of these because this is just so fascinating. You're getting us so much love in the chat too. People are very excited.
Nice.
Oh
you haven't actually told me how to see the chat, so this will all be a delightful wash of love when I watch the rerun.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, great. We're saving some of the chat questions for after we finish our core interview questions. So know that the people are also asking questions, and they are on the way.
Okay.
So this ties back a little bit into maybe more of a technical question for the audience who doesn't know. So we've talked about AFS, the American Folklore Society Conference, which is the national sort of North American conference for folklorists. What is the relationship to Contemporary Legend, the journal that you edited forever and are now the incoming president of, if I believe correctly? Yes?
I'm president-elect, yeah.
President-elect, yes. And what is the role of the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research in the field of folklore, which is the community that produces the journal Contemporary Legend?
Yeah, well, that society started in, I guess it technically started in the late 80s after a series of conferences that began to be hosted at the University of Sheffield in the early 80s, started by people like, I'm going to say started, and then someone's going to immediately challenge me on it. But Paul Smith and Gillian Boyd and Bill Nicolaisen and a whole group of people who were there. And then Bill Ellis joined soon thereafter, and Sandy Hobbs, and this really interesting early cohort that was, largely England and North America, and a hint of Northern Europe every now and then. Basically, this new form that had been studied in part, maybe brushed on by Dorson, and certainly Brunvand had dabbled his toes, and of course there are other names in there. But the idea that there was this form of folklore that was contemporary, as the name suggests, emergent, always evolving. It wasn't a fixed canon, even though there were certainly these tendrils that you could see have precedent, but the slow sort of theorizing of this form that also would be of interest to sociologists and anthropologists and political scientists and psychologists and so on. Maybe I meant listed psychology twice. I'm drinking rum. And so they had the first batch of conference proceedings. They published those, and then they decided a journal to be started in the late 80s, early 1990s. What its relationship is to American Folklore Society is, it is an independent body, if you sort of want a very dry answer. It's its own thing with its own history, but clearly an awful lot of overlap. But Contemporary Legend, the ISCLR, the society, and Contemporary Legend, the journal that it produces, is just this very small but interesting forum where that focuses on the legend as classically understood, because, like Linda Degg said, there are no contemporary legends; there are just legends. You know, that we don't sort of qualify it on this way. We have some really interesting ones about, because you know, a legend is just like the folk are always contemporary to their times. Legends, one of the reasons we use contemporary as opposed to urban, is not because they are of the late 20th century, but because they are in active circulation. A legend is contemporary to its time. So as we can talk about the contemporary legends of Rome or the contemporary legends of the Victorian era and so on, and that they are still in that active mode, that where if a legend is fundamentally a question, it is trying to where the answers are not forthcoming. It is where the answer hasn't necessarily been settled yet. So it's like active and alive and being told. And again, not story, me trying to figure shit out using the narrative devices, but that's just simply how we communicate. So I might express this idea narratively in terms of like putting events into some kind of sequence and establishing characters and so on. But most of the time, when I'm actually being told in that sort of first flush of it, I'm just like, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Did you hear? I know how to tell a story, but I am not telling a story with a capital S. And so that's kind of like that's the chicken McNugget of what contemporary legend is. It's what we all crave in that little bit. Of course, we hardly ever get to capture that. So often we capture it only when it's in some kind of, now when it's sort of entered into the realm of irony and meta commentary, like your paper on Tide Pods, for example.
Sure.
I know that article, intimately, but there's only so much active legend that you were able to capture. It was basically you captured the commentary about the legend and the irony about the legend. So you kind of knew that there was something there, and there's only so much because it's so very ephemeral. It's not. You sort of only really get like wisps of the actual legend. But that's what we have. So it's every now and then it's kind of reconstructive. So what we do is, then we're just like basically the ugly stepchild. We go to AFS. Sometimes we'll sponsor panels. Sometimes we go to all the contemporary legend panels we can and say, hey, I know you're at the American Folklore Society with their journal, which is mega big and in super huge circulation and so on, and very prestigious. But how about us? Our stuff is good. Don't get us wrong. People who know us like us a lot, and our subscription base is poco. But good news, we are working towards it being digitized, and we are going to sort of start making it not only digitized but open access. That is a process that is happening. It hasn't happened yet. So all of a sudden, not only will issues going forward be more accessible, but all our back catalog, which heretofore has just been sort of stuck in the weird digital archives that they have at MUN.
That's awesome.
Did that answer your question?
It more than answers the question. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And for the chat who doesn't know, I did write a paper about Tide Pods with a couple other folklorists from my master's program. That might have been out of context. Whose names are the wonderful and intrepid Michelle Jones, Shelley Jones, and Camille Price.
Yay!
Camille Slight Price. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yes.
So, friends.
Shouldn't have more run.
Tom, do you want to ask this follow-up question?
Let me ask this question real quick, Ian. What is this bee sting story that Daisy keeps talking about? Speaking of Iskler.
Oh my lord! Right. Okay. So you know Daisy well, correct?
Yes. Daisy.
We spent some time together.
I co-host and played my son in a play once.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
And come up with a list of adjectives that you might use to describe them.
Ethereal. Dreamlike. Goofy. Just like the internet dial-up noise from the 90s. I think those are the first ones that come to mind.
That works quite well. So I am, in a foreign land, with my legendary peeps. And we have just spent The thing about European conferences is they do it up right, because
Yes,
they have
that's
a couple of days of
freaking
papers, and then
true.
they have a field trip, and you go to a different place, and they rent a bus, and you go on a field trip, and then you go and have 2 more days of papers, and it's quite lovely.
Yes.
And so in 2018,
Oh
after
God,
my
I didn't
fish incident,
I didn't even remember what year it was.
oh, I remember, 2018, early June.
Oh no.
Iskler was meeting in Brussels, and Aurora van der Winkel, who organized the conference, and yes, that is her real name, she organized a day trip to Bruges, as in Bruges, and so there's lots of punching and assassins, like most European cities.
Yes.
And so, we had a delightful time, did we not, Daisy?
Oh, we had such a fun time. It was so cool.
Oh, was Bruges not a lovely place?
It was beautiful. There was beer flowing. There were people thinking about legends, and
we went to a brewery which they made us climb like all these metal staircases and go outside, and then we'd like, oh, that was worth it, even though it stank of malt.
Yeah,
and
it was
and was terrified that was not up to North American code. But we had a good time. We went out the canal.
Yes, and I was just looking at some pictures I had of that too. I went to the museum. I saw a thylacine. That was really cool.
And then we all clamber on the bus back to Brussels.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've ever met a folklore graduate student, Don.
I've known a couple.
Right. They're pretty intense and earnest.
Pesky.
Yeah.
True.
So I don't know about pesky. Pesky is a no word.
Oh. Okay.
So there I am, and I'm cool. So I'm in the back row, and Daisy is not. So they're in the row in front of the back row.
And I think I'm sitting with the wonderful and intrepid Michelle Jones.
Yes, you were.
Hey.
And there is Stephen Winnick is over here, and Libby is like 3 or 4 seats ahead, and Michael Coven is in the other corner of the back of the bus, and that's fine. Tyler, Daisy, the entire time, she is like turned around, that's on the back of a bus. You know when you were in the second to the last row. Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's going on? And asking questions that are basically the whole theme of, isn't folklore cool? Which is like,
sounds like them.
Yeah, it is. I'm half baked after a day in Bruges and quite tired, quite frankly, after taking care of Sandy Hobbs. But no, please let me answer your questions. And this is going fine. So we're having a lovely chat because, as you know, one of the adjectives that you would use to describe Daisy is lovely. And this intense, lovely chat. And then she's like, look, they're looking at me in a sort of intense sort of way.
Yes.
And I don't know exactly what is going on, and they don't say anything. And I feel something. And what I feel is something crawling across my eyeball. Inside my glasses.
Eyeball?
Well, across the surface of my eyeball.
This is why my master's degree got revoked.
Yeah.
You wish.
And so wait! Person I just met. Person who might want a letter of recommendation from me one day.
Person who might have you on their show.
Person who might have a show. Is there something on my eye? And she's like, they're like, yes. And I'm like, what is it? And I start to move it away, and they go, because they realize that I'm about to touch a bee and potentially shove a bee into my eye. So they just shudder a little bit. And so instead, I remove my glasses and I see a bee fluttering away. And I think, how long was that bee on my eyeball? Yeah. Oh, that was there for a very long time. And you decided not to mention it. Like, maybe this is a thing that senior folklorists like doing. They really like having bees on their eyes. I don't know. I'm just a young MA student and don't know how you senior scholars work, so I'm not going to mention the bee that is crawling on your eye.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I am, you know me a little bit. I'm a cool, calm, collected sumbitch. But I'm starting to be a little bit indignant about, like, I'm sorry, emergent scholar. This is something that you could have mentioned to me. Meanwhile, all these assholes who I thought were my friends, Stephen Winnick, he is laughing like Santa Claus has just been, exploded.
Oh my God.
You're turning my lights down. Okay, Jummy is not in bed yet. And Michael Coven is faking being asleep, but I know that he's not asleep.
He was faking being asleep.
Whoa, my light. He is giggling and vibrating and so on. And like, you people are meant to be my friends. You should be defending me.
In Michael,
you should be saying, hey, Daisy, next time at least, mention the B on your new putative friend / potential mentor's eyes. This is just a professional tip. Hey people in chat, take it from your good friend Ian. If you are trying to get ahead in this world and you see someone that might help you, is already, at least as far as that person is concerned, extended a hand of friendship.
Yes.
Perhaps, should you see a bee crawling across their eye, hey, mention it. Just cash-like. In that sort of, sort of way. That'll work volumes in your future. So that's basically the bee story.
In Michael Coven's defense, he studies horror as his job, so I'm sure he was waiting for it to happen.
Right.
Yeah, and it's basically the plot of, as chat's pointing out, it's basically the plot of The Wicker Man in slow motion.
In very slow motion. In very slow motion. And the thing is that none of these people were sympathetic whatsoever. Stephen Winnick giggling.
Thought it was
Sound that'll haunt me to the end of the earth. Jean Marie was no great shakes either.
I know. She was like,
hey, Daisy, because nothing's going to top that, can we, speed round some chat questions with Ian right now?
oh my God, yes, please.
It looks like you might need a break, Daisy.
I think I've revoked. I've been revoked from giving anybody advice on self-care.
I just think you need to breathe. Ian, I've got some questions from chat for you real quick. You ready?
Hello, chat. I am ready.
Yes. Does local jokes get local work in the age of Netflix specials?
Yes, but since everyone wants Netflix specials, no one does local jokes anymore.
Do you, I guess other than Bernard Lonergan, do you have a favorite theologian?
I like Ronner. I like Carl Ronner. I like Carl Ronner especially because of his mad diss against Bernard Lonergan, where he said it's all very well and good to cut your intellectual knife, or to sharpen your intellectual knife, but eventually you have to cut something with it, which is just a slam. And you could think about that for any theoretical folklorist.
Very good.
That's like
That's
a
good.
Nas lyric.
That's good.
Exactly. That's cool. Carl Ronner was old school.
What do you have a hot take on Aristotle's Poetics?
It's fine. It's I talk about that and that lost book of Poetics where he the whole plot of Name of the Rose.
Yes, Name of the Rose.
Yeah. There probably would have been something. The Greek concepts of humor and stuff are weird and wacky, and the notion of parody and so on is kind of fun. Once you realize that a lot of the early Greek tragedy and plays were actually weird, deep parodies, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. So, folk culture was always there, boys.
Are you a fan of The Marvelous Miss Maisel?
The Marvelous Miss Maisel.
You haven't watched it?
I feel bad.
Lenny Bruce is like a main character.
I know, but one of the things is that there's a certain amount of professional exhaustion, and once when the dissertation was done and the book was written, and it's and that just timed exactly with the explosion. I mean, just before Netflix really sort of became a thing, and then everyone's like, "Have you seen this thing?" It's like, when I watch comedy, it really is work. And so it's everything is like, I should be taking notes about this. And when I watch depictions of comedy, it's very much work. So when I sort of cleansed a little bit and I'm like looking for other kind of research projects, so like I will look at comedy when I can handle it, really, because it was, I don't know, man, you've written a dissertation. It's an exhausting thing. I mean,
I did
when's the
eat hot
last
dogs
time?
for like a year, yeah.
Exactly. So imagine that. But then everyone's saying, have you tried this hot dog? It's like, I will get to it. It's on the goddamn list.
Exactly.
So I've heard good things, and I've heard good things about Hacks too, but I haven't gotten to watch it. So I will.
This isn't really a question, but it's a request. Pick your favorite book within arm's reach and explain why it's important.
Oh, okay. I have a lot of books within arm's reach.
Pick one.
Pick one. Okay.
So many books.
Jesus, here's Communitas, The Anthropology of Collective Joy by Edith Turner.
Oh,
Edith Turner.
Yeah. It's important because
I
think
want that book.
Let
me write it down.
There we go. I think one of the things, a project that I kind of have in the sort of a long-term dream project, is I am fundamentally a depressive, and like I do not, for reasons we don't need to necessarily go into. But one of the things that I'm really fascinated in is that we can talk about these expressive forms, so we could talk about folklore an awful lot, but we really don't have. When we start talking about the fact that these things are pleasurable and these things bring us joy or these things are beautiful, we kind of fail in that language because we have weak language to describe affectivity. We have a very weak language to describe these things about delight. And I think, Edith Turner's work on Communitas, the idea like, one of the reasons we do this is because it brings us joy, and that is sufficient. That is the rationale you need. You don't need a functional explanation. You don't necessarily need the symbolic explanation. You begin with the idea that there are things, and it's not about pleasure in that sort of almost, I'm blanking on my Greek terms word, Epicurean sense. It's the fact that it is a joy. It's joy in the way that it is almost the polar opposite from trauma. These experiences that are transformative and that stay with us, but the affect they have on us is absolutely positive. So, but we don't have that language. And for someone to write a book about joy as the thing, perhaps the very first thing we should be talking about when we talk about these things, as opposed to any kind of sort of, I go back to the F word of functionalist rationale for them, or their historical precedents, or they do it because of pride in their communities or whatever. No, they do it because it is fun and because it is a powerful bringing together through affective forms.
Yeah,
and that is sufficient. I think Moira Marsh talks about this a lot.
My old boss.
Yes, when she said, fun is fun, and you do not need a subsequent rationale for it. That's not her words, but that's her idea. You don't need to explain these things away. But there's her, there's Edith Turner, but there's very few, as far as I can tell, real discussions about this, about joy as a motivator. And Dorothy Noyes has that article that she writes based on that Henry Glassy quote. The aesthetic is the opposite of anesthetic, and I think that's sort of hinting at that aesthetic is the opposite of numbness.
Yes,
and I think that there's something to be said about that.
I think it's called aesthetic is the opposite of anesthetic.
Yeah,
I think that's what it's
almost
called.
Exactly what I said. Yeah.
Yeah, basically exactly what you said.
Hey, there you go. That was
good answer.
Yeah.
Daisy, can I hit him with 2 more chat questions, then we'll go to his activity?
We do have an activity. Oh my God. Okay, we'll circle back into these if you still have steam after the activity, because there's a couple.
Do you have steam, Daisy? It was your bedtime 15 minutes ago.
I mean, I'll be fine. This is fun. This is fun.
All right.
Yes.
Ian,
Yes.
Hannah Gadsby's Nanette. Is that comedy? Weigh in on this debate.
Well, it's comedy because it happened on a stage. It happened within the context of what is more or less putatively a comedy context within the art world of comedy. It elicits laughs, even if its primary motivation is not necessarily to elicit laugh. So I would say yes, because it's still someone standing on a stage and making a connection with people. I mean, obviously the reward for the comedian is typically laughter. That is how you mark a successful performance. And I think what she's doing in that special is she's not denying herself that reward, but she is denying the audience the reward of participating in that way. It's like, no, we're going to ponder this for a while. We're going to ponder it by talking about this thing as a content and not as a vehicle for mirth. Don't worry, there will be mirth. There will be whatever kind of pseudo-catharsis that you come to a show for, but not that comedy is always there for pseudo-catharsis. It's there for shits and giggles. But, you know, that will happen, but I'm going to take you on this ride first. You signed up for this by being in my audience, and I'm going to take you there. But I'm not going to. This isn't an antagonistic relationship, but this is not a sort of a shuck and jive moment. This is let's think about these assumptions, and then let's have a couple of giggles at the end.
And this last one comes from Libby Tucker. Have you come to a decision on your bespoke puppet?
I'm just going to go with sort of the classic, the person who's pissed off because Grover is his waiter. But, you know, maybe that's too old school Sesame Street for you kids.
My earliest memory is Elmo.
Oh, my goodness, I'm forgetting. I'm talking with the heathens. Oh, yeah, Grover would come in. And the guy who never got his order right because Grover didn't understand anything. He's a perfectly oval, bald-headed, red-nosed blue Muppet. And he's just like, this isn't what I ordered. And Grover would go away. It's like, I'll be right back. And hilarity would ensue. Although I'd throw in a kind of a roguish goatee just to bring it into the 2020s.
Good.
That'd be good.
I love you, Libby Tucker.
Aww. I hope she's still here. I can't tell. I can't tell from this OBS studio, but I hope she is. We can see who's like lurking in our chat if they're signed in.
I think she's gone. Yeah.
She'll watch. She'll watch the rest of it.
She'll watch
it later.
I still love you, Libby Tucker.
Aw. Ian, are you ready to play a game?
I guess I have no fucking choice, do I? Let's go.
Drinking rum.
Oh my gosh.
I've been drinking rum.
Okay, so I have to fix our screens really quick. But we are gonna play a game. Okay. Dom, would you tell Ian what game this is and how we're playing it?
Yes. So friends of the show might be familiar with tier lists, but sometimes we got too many ideas for a tier list and we got to play another game. So, Ian, you good, Daisy?
Is that good?
Nope. Way smaller. Ian, today we are going to play This or That Comedy Edition, where we are going to have various different genres and forms and examples of comedy, and you have to tell me which one you prefer. Okay. And in just a second, Daisy is going to
Is this
share.
too weird?
You gotta share the screen, Daisy.
I know. I'm just making it look. I gotta make sure it's good for the Twitch audience. Hold on. I'm doing it, people. I'm really.
Go for it.
Wow.
All right.
Okay, here we go. Okay.
So we're gonna do a little round of this. We're gonna do a little round of this or that. We're gonna have two examples, and you are going to pick which one you prefer. So click the watch stream in Discord.
Yes.
And Disney is going to advance the PowerPoint. Are you ready?
Default layout in PowerPoint. Very nice.
Yeah.
For you, but not for the audience. Okay.
There's more.
Oh, okay.
Just we wait and see. All right. Are you ready for your first one, this or that?
Sure.
Okay, so Ian, parody or satire?
Parody.
And,
Do you have any reason
do you
why?
have a why in a sentence? Why?
I think it's more creative. I think it's sort of a more collaborative and a more responsive form.
Sure. All
All
right.
right.
Next one, we've got sketch or improv.
Oh, that's tough. I mean, they are. Oh, Jesus. Okay. I did improv. I love improv, and I love that sort of that notion of spontaneity. But I mean, the best sketch is stuff that really has its birth in improv. So you think
Sure.
about like how SCTV. And these are not the short, pithy answers that you're looking for. And
After
the fact that the thing about improv is that improv doesn't necessarily have to be funny. We imagine that funny improv is the default, but I have actually seen, and I've actually participated. When we were in Canada, they have improv in the high schools and like in a national team. So like my high school went to nationals a couple of times. That's how I know Sandra Oh. I call her Sandy.
oh my god, I was gonna say, wow, first name.
Because we were both on improv teams at rival schools. And one year, our team said, we don't have to make this funny. There's actually nothing in this that made it funny. We did this like really serious improv, and which is very weird for high school. And so you have things like the long form and the Herald and so on, which are often intend funniness but do not require it.
Sure.
Sketch is just this different. I mean, sketch is a mercenary thing. I mean, you're in and out. So even though they are genetically related, they're sort of like such disparate forms. Conversely, I mean, good sketch has had a vetting process. Improv exists in the moment, and it can be brilliant and it can be awful. So if I had to choose as a consumer, I would go to sketch because I know it's been workshopped. Just that little bit. I might be missing the transcendence, also be missing the dregs. How about that?
That was a hell of an answer. Yeah, you sold me.
It was a good complicated pairing then.
Yeah. You've ever been to like a instrumental like jam session?
Yes, and sometimes they're bad.
Sometimes they're bad, and sometimes they're the most transformative experiences you have.
Yes.
And yet, maybe you want to go and have the transformative experiences. Cool, but you're going to have to sit through a lot of people doing like, I'm going to do Margaritaville on a boron. It's like, okay, here we go. We're doing this. So there you are.
Next one, deadpan humor or anti-humor?
Well, they're very much sides of the two coins, and you chose two terribly perfect people to illustrate them both.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Dom.
I think ultimately I would go with, if this is how you're categorizing it, I would go with anti-humor.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We've got burlesque or ventriloquism?
Burlesque.
Not sure. Not.
A, fewer puppets. B, more nipples. I think it's.
Okay. I mean, it's Dom. What did you say when we were putting this together with all the sleuths?
Which one needs to be left in the 1920s?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've done it. The next one we have is anecdotal comedy or heritage comedy.
Oh, wow. And again, you chose particularly interesting avatars for them.
Thank you, Ian.
I mean,
I had a lot of fun making this PowerPoint.
Ultimately, I think I would go for anecdotal, but I think heritage comedy really needs to be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. And even people like Foxworthy, they need to be taken seriously because it is this It's this, I mean, again, that sort of local jokes get local works. It's this politics of recognition. And there's an awful lot of interesting overlap between Chappelle and Foxworthy in terms of like their histories. I read this one article. It's one of those articles that I found and then lost and never found again. But it was about a Southerner who was talking about an experience at a Foxworthy show. And it's like he was finding it funny, but he didn't like the fact that the people in the rows in front of him were finding it funny because they clearly weren't from the same heritage.
Yeah.
And that's kind of exactly what was happening with Chappelle when he left the scene, in that basically his white audience was laughing at the wrong things. They were laughing at the caricature without understanding the depth of the caricature behind it. And so that's why I said they're so very closely related. I mean, they're different styles, perhaps, but I mean, they're stylistically very different. But they're both dealing with these marginalized cultures that are also then spread. Historically marginalized, historically unprivileged, disprivileged cultures that are now in the mainstream and fighting for some kind of voice. At least as products. You could throw Foxworthy to the hounds every now and then, but there's a really interesting thing behind him.
Yeah.
And him. I'll salvage Foxworthy every now and then. Okay, not the pithy answer you're looking for.
So who are you picking?
I pick anecdotal.
Anecdotal, okay.
Ultimately. Okay.
Ultimately.
But ultimately, yes. I would, but it's close.
I'll go back one. There. What? Daisy, calm down.
Wordplay.
I went too fast. Wordplay. Not props.
Smart.
No. Leave that to the material culture scholars.
Hey. And next, Daisy, we've got blue comedy or black comedy.
I'm going to say blue comedy, because black comedy isn't always funny. One of the... This might be infamia, but I find Bill Hicks tiresome. And the same way that I found the last 15 years of Carlin kind of tiresome. I mean, he's basically angry and saying it in a kind of fun way. But,
fair.
I mean, there is something to be said that, it's... I mean, I was on a podcast that's going to come out soon, and it was about Carlin, and the host was saying that we were doing Place for My Stuff, and sort of one of the last moments of Carlin being enjoyed. It's not a good album, but it's sort of like one of the end of his sort of fun era. It's like,
I grew up on that, yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agreed, because late Carlin you don't listen to late Carlin for fun. You might listen. He has something to say about the human condition, but it's like, fuck the human condition. Sometimes I want to listen for fun. And Joan Rivers was brilliant and wasn't always talking about the human condition and making me feel shitty about myself. And that's what Bill Hicks and George Carlin ended up doing a lot of the time. So sure. If this is the choice, I'm going to go for blue comedy. There you go.
You convinced me. Convinced me.
Very fair.
Next, we got musical comedy or slapstick.
Most music. I would say that's tricky. That's tricky, because a lot of musical comedy, no. But then you throw up Garfunkel and Oates, who are very, very good at it. And then you have Bean, who is Atkinson is good. So I will. Okay, I'm going to go for musical comedy. Basically, because for every Atkinson, there's a Just for Laughs gags or well, Jackass is actually pretty good, but the Jackass imitators. And so
Impractical Jokers.
Impractical Jokers. That's the one I was trying to remember.
Yeah, sorry to put them on blast.
Yeah.
Fair.
I'll go for musical comedy. At least you gotta, you have at the very least, you can just listen to the music if need be.
Alt comedy or cringe?
Alt comedy. Cringe just gets tiring. If you're kind of lean towards the empathetic, cringe is just too much.
Sure. And
almost last.
Two more. Who's on first or Dead Parrot?
going to go for Dead Parrot. I mean, who's on as an illustration of something? I'm going to go for Dead Parrot. Who's on first is brilliant. It's also an illustration about how things are. You know, at one time were communally owned, and then the issues of copyright and so on. I wish you'd said cheese shop sketch instead of Dead Parrot, but yeah, that's a no-brainer. Because then I'll go for Dead Parrot as well for personal reasons, in that I was raised on Monty Python and bred in the bone on Monty Python. Here's a almost fun Monty Python story. My father was dying of cancer. And
almost fun, you say?
Almost funny. We'll get there. And so this was in 2000, and I've written about this in an article as well. But this part isn't in the article. It was in late 2001, early 2002. And it was my first semester as a grad student in folklore. It was exactly after September 11th. I called him on September 11th to say, what's going on? How are you feeling? And he said, yeah, it's pretty weird. And then I called back the next day and I said, you don't sound, I mean, obviously you sound perturbed, but not about September 11th. And he said, yeah, well, there's blood in my urine. And so he described that basically within 6 months, he was dead. Spoiler. So at the end of November, I went home. Dom, you look. I can't see how Daisy looks like, but Dom looks a little bit disturbed right now. But don't worry, it gets funny. So
I can't imagine how.
I go back in November for a couple of weeks, to take myself out of classes for a little bit because he's not doing well, and he was supposed to have surgery. And no, he did have surgery. It was kidney cancer. Kidney cancer doesn't respond to chemo. It's a very insidious cancer, and it's also one of the things that it doesn't show up on tests. I mean, it's non-symptomatic really until blood in the urine, at which point it's like, oh, your kidney is riddled with cancer. And so I wasn't there until after the surgery, and the surgery was described as, they took out basically the size of a baby was like what the cancer that was around the kidney. Oh. Don't worry, it gets funny. And then,
I'm afraid that you're just saying that, and that's the funny part.
No, let the God work. Let the God work.
And then what happened is he's recovering a little bit from the surgery, but something's not quite right. And he's falling his balance isn't good. It's like, maybe that's an effect of the surgery. It's like, oh no, it has metastasized to his brain. So now he has a cancer that really can't be treated with much of anything apart from surgery in his brain. It's like, oh, this is not good. Don't worry, this gets funny. And so we're hearing about all these various treatments. And one of the things that's really recommended is stereotactic radiation. That's basically when two beams of radiation converge. You come across, and at the focal point, they can sort of go into your brain and beat that thing. And they said, this is the stuff that George Harrison is getting. George Harrison dies the next fucking day, right? So we're like, okay, this is so I now accompany him to the cancer treatment center in Ottawa with him, the woman he's been seeing for a number of years, and we're at the cancer center, and basically the cancer person says, there's really not much. You can try the stereotactic radiation. It's your best bet. You can't do surgery. You have 5 tumors in your brain. You can't do chemotherapy, does not happen. And so this is our best shot. We're going to do stereotactic, and it's going to happen. Okay. So we leave the clinic, and as you might have guessed, we're a little bit bummed. And we get back to Gladys's house, and we're sitting there, and she's in tears, and the other people around us are in tears. And my father and I are sitting at the table. And we start into the cheese shop sketch. Do you know the Python cheese shop sketch where John Cleese walks into, because it's Cleese and Palin, and John Cleese walks into the cheese shop and he says, I'm interested in some cheese. And he starts listing cheeses, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, we're fresh out of that. And it's just like, list, nope. And so we start doing that, except we start listing treatments for cancer.
Oh my God. my
he's like, how about stereotactic? Oh, I'm
No.
afraid not, sir. He's like, this isn't much of a cancer clinic, is it?
Yeah.
Well, it's the finest in the district.
Oh my
Gives
god.
you that impression. It's so clean. Well, it's certainly uncontaminated with cures for cancer.
Oh my gosh.
We are like pissing ourselves at this point. Meanwhile,
gosh.
Gladys is like, what are they laughing at? Because basically the worst
Yeah.
news that has possibly happened has happened.
Yeah.
So,
Oh
yeah,
my
that sort of
gosh.
personal connection. And again, we can speak about the cathartic nature and so on. And this might have been a better one for the black humor slide.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But Monty
That's
Python-
why I have to go for Dead Parrot, because it's Cleese and Palin.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
All right, you ready for the last one?
Take a drink first. Ready?
Yeah.
All right, last. Gershon Legman or Elliot Oring?
Is this who I want to kiss more?
It's just this or that. It's just this or that.
Definite answer to that. Yeah, just this or that. That's all it is.
That's
This
all.
or
It's
that.
just this or that.
Well, without giving anything away, poker face, Elliot Oring.
Boom! Everyone,
Booyakasha!
this has been This or That with Ian Brodie, and all of your deepest questions
Oh
about
my
comedy
gosh.
are now answered. Thank you very much, Ian. Daisy,
Yes.
how are you doing?
Oh my god. I'm okay. This has been amazing. I feel like I just got a very tailored class, completely taught by Ian Brodie about all the stuff Ian Brodie does. So thank you so much for being on here. Yeah,
You're welcome.
Yeah, Gerg points out, can we recognize, again, Ian's brilliance as a scholar and also his generosity in reaching out to and supporting grad students. He's a great role model for being a kind folklorist. Much gratitude for Ian, and Folkwise, thanks for a great Tuesday night. So,
Whoa,
yeah,
who's saying that?
Gerg23, you'll have to find out. Maybe we can...
Yeah, I'm not gonna dox.
I'm not gonna dox Gerg, but...
Well, thank you, Gerg. Introduce yourself next time
Yeah,
we're at AFS.
yes.
Yeah, that'll happen.
That'll happen. Wow, Ian, I mean, I know I let a bee sting you one time, but I echo the exact same.
You still have some karmic work to do.
Okay.
But I like you very much nonetheless.
I do too. Do you know that Shelly, Camille, and I call you our funkle, our folklore uncle, because Lynn was our advisor, and so she's like our folklore mom, and you're like our folklore uncle, and Andrea's our font, our folklore aunt.
Font is font or
Font.
It's slightly better than fant, but neither of them are particularly flattering
Is funkle?
for someone as graceful as Andrea.
I know.
Hey,
What?
fant. That doesn't quite work.
It does not, especially for being the ethereal witch that she is. Hey, tell
you
her
go.
if you had fun, come on the show. Tell her to come on.
I shall do so.
We would love to have her any day.
Daisy, do you wanna say it? Do you wanna do the honors?
What do you mean?
You need to ask chat to do something now that the interview's over.
GG's in the chat, everybody.
There it is.
For Ian, our second gamer ever on the show.
True gamer,
Second
Ian
true-
Brodie. GG's in the
True
chat
gamer.
for Ian. Ladders for Ian.
GG's. Yes, please show your support.
Sorry, I couldn't resist saying it.
Show your support through all of the cool emotes that you have. Don't forget to check out our merch if you want. Buy Ian's book. Find Ian at AFS. And everybody have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.